Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be going through my favorite books. Well, I kind of struggled on how I wanted to do this video because I find it very difficult to talk about books I love. And I feel like a lot of people get like that because sometimes books just like connect with you and you can't really explain why. So like books that I hate, I can just rant about why I dislike them so much. And even books that I'm pretty like neutral on, I can talk, this was what I liked about it, this is what I didn't like about it. But when there's a book that I just truly love, sometimes I can't explain why. I just do. So don't expect like some really great reviews going on here. I just kind of wanted to do this video to kind of document, at this point in my life, these are what I consider favorite books. And so then maybe in however many years I can revisit this and be like, well, I wouldn't consider any of those favorites anymore. So I was going to split this up into like favorite standalones, favorite series. But I realized there's only 2 standalones that I really consider like absolute favorites. So I can't do a video with just 2 books. I'm also going to talk about what I would consider my top 5 favorite series, my favorite standalones. First one I'm going to talk about is Lost Boy by Christina Henry. This is a Peter Pan retelling and it's a really quick read. It is just under 300 pages. It's like 297. So like I think I read this in about a day, maybe 2. And I mean, I just absolutely flew through it and I fell in love with the characters and I fell in love with the story inside here. This was a book that when I finished it, I literally couldn't stop thinking about it for like a couple of weeks afterwards. Like I would just be like, be about to go to bed and then it'd be like, remember Lost Boy? As I said, this is a Peter Pan retelling and we follow Jamie. He is kind of basically the caretaker of all of these children and he is also Peter Pan's best friend. And eventually Jamie kind of starts to get annoyed because Peter just really doesn't care about these children. They're just kind of pawns for him in this game. I just absolutely adore it and it blew my mind when I read it and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I adore the characters in here and I love the way the story progressed. My favorite standalone is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. This book, I've read this 3 times now. And every time I start it, I go, I don't think I'm gonna love it as much this time. This doesn't seem like the thing I would read because it's a contemporary and there's pop culture references in it and I don't like those kind of things. And so every time I start it, I go, oh, I'm not gonna like it, am I? And then by the end, I'm an emotional mess. I've read it 3 times and every time that happens without fail. This book, I can tell you why I love it so much and that's because it came into my life at the exact right time. I read this in my final year of school. So I was in the exact same position as Frances. She was studying all the time and she was conflicted about what she wanted to do with her life. And I felt very seen by this. And I just really loved it. It follows Frances. She's like a study machine. She wants to go to Cambridge and she is like top of her class. She's a head girl. What the people don't know is that she loves this podcast and she draws fan art for it the whole time. Then the creator of this podcast reaches out to her to ask for her to officially do fan art for the show and a friendship forms between the 2 of them. I love it. It is a story about friendship and it's a story about school pressure and it's a story about just because you're academically gifted doesn't mean you can't also do something creative and I really love it a lot. This is not a book that I would usually love. I love fantasy books. This is not my usual thing, but as I said, it came into my life at the exact right time. Now we're going to actually move on to my top favorite series of all time, and this is in no particular order because that's way too difficult for me to do. The first series I'm going to talk about is The Monsters of Verity by V.E. Schwab. This is one of her YA series. It follows monsters and humans in this city, and so this city is split in half. The one side is run by the Harkers, the other is run by the Flynns, and we follow Kate Harker, who wants to be as ruthless as her father, and we also follow August Flynn, who is actually one of these monsters, and he just wants to be a human and as kind as his father. Then the Flynns send August to spy on Kate, and eventually kind of a truce forms between the 2 of them because they have a feeling something fishy is happening. I fell in love with this series when I read it last year. I feel like we often talk about V.E. Schwab when we're talking about her adult series, right? I love her adult series. You might see one in a few minutes. She also tells some really good YA stories as well, and I think people just expect like her adult stuff, and that's why they end up getting disappointed. But I went into this with pretty low expectations actually, because I was like, it's YA, it's not going to be like as dark, it's not going to be as complicated, and it isn't, but I just absolutely fell in love with these characters is the main thing, and I was so afraid for what would happen to them, and I thought the magic system was really cool and unique, especially the first book. This absolutely blew my mind. I think most people prefer the second book, but for some reason the first book just like really spoke to me, and I still gave the second book a 5 star. They're both 5 stars for me, but this was like a 10 out of 5 stars. So yeah, I absolutely adore this series. I would recommend this if you're just like, you haven't read any V.E. Schwab yet and you like want to start somewhere. I would recommend this or The Archived. I would recommend like one of her YA series. It's not going to be the exact same as her adult stuff, but I think it's still a lot of fun and very interesting, and it still has like that typical kind of grey morality that we see in V.E. Schwab books. So then the next series I'm going to talk about is one that at first I didn't consider it a favorite series, because I was like, I can't consider something a favorite series if it hasn't all been 5 stars. And I realized that's not true. You can have a series that is just one 5-star book that really brings the series together, and it can be a favorite series. And so there's actually 2 series on this list that follow that. I always believed if it's a favorite series, every book has to be a 5-star. And these 2 series that I'm going to talk about, they both changed my mind on that. The Witchland series by Susan Dennard, that is Truth Witch, Wind Witch, Sight Witch, the novella, and Blood Witch. So Blood Witch is the only one that actually got a 5 out of 5 stars, but I think this just brings the series and everything we've learned so far together so perfectly. And this was another one, kind of like with The Lost Boy. When I finished reading this, I literally like couldn't stop thinking about it. It just popped into my head for like the next like 2 weeks. And as soon as I finished it, to myself, I should pick up the first book again. And I had to actually stop myself from doing that. I was so close to immediately starting the series again. Just so you know, I have a Discord. I haven't linked it down in the description, because I'm currently rereading this series in anticipation of Witch Shadow. So if you want to join and read with me, that is linked down below. This follows Sophia and Isolde. Sophia is a truth witch, and in this world that is a rare power, and it is a pretty important power, especially when a truce is coming to an end and a war might be breaking out. And one day Sophia accidentally shows her power, and then her and Isolde end up going on the run. I say this every time I start it. I feel like it starts out as a pretty typical YA, and you read it and you're like, yeah, it's good, but I don't think it's anything like absolutely mind-blowing. And like, I don't think it's bad. Like, please don't think I think it's bad. It is a 4-star for me, but I don't think it's anything like super mind-blowing. I think it is a good, solid book. And then you get to Wind Witch and you're like, okay, you start to see things in here and you're like, that's interesting. I haven't heard of something like that before. But again, this was another 4-star for me. I'm starting to see something, but I don't absolutely love it. And I think upon reread, this might be a 5-star for me, because I think there was things that I completely missed when I read it for the first time. And then you get to Sight Witch, and that is completely different from the 2 of these, and it's such a unique story. And again, I gave that 4-star, but I think it's probably, I definitely think that's going to be a 5-star on reread, because it's really good. And it really ties in some very important things. So it is required reading if you're going to read the series, because you will miss things in Blood Witch and Witch Shadow that you would not have picked up on if you don't read that novella. And I think that is why I love Blood Witch so much, is because I read that novella and it completely changed the story, because you find out things in this that relate to Sight Witch and it blows your mind. I remember if you remember my old bed, I was in bed reading. I finished it and I literally went, I want to reread them. This again is a series that I 4-starred the first 2 books and I gave the last book a 5-star. I adore this series with my whole heart, and I know one day I will reread them and they will all be 5 stars for me, because like with the Witchland series, there are things that happen in this that I did not pick up on the hints whatsoever, and it is so masterfully crafted that I'm gonna 5-star my way through it the next time I read it. And that is the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. Could you have guessed it? I'm pretty sure you probably guessed it. So Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, and the love of my life, one of my favorite books, full stop, ever, Assassin's Quest. I love these so much. I would die for Fitz. And I don't even think I'm being dramatic. And as you can see, this series, it gets pretty chunky. This is a 390-page book. It took me 3 weeks to read this. This is an 830-page book. It took me 3 days. Yeah, and it is pretty small writing. So this series starts when Fitz is a young child and he is left at the keep by his maternal grandfather, who kind of just abandons him and is like, this is your king in waiting's illegitimate son. I don't want to have to feed him anymore. Do what you want with him. And then Fitz is taken to Buckkeep and he is raised by Burke, who was his father's right-hand man. And he is like in charge of the stables, and his father has now abdicated his position and fled to the countryside. At first, Fitz just helps Burke in the stable, but soon the king is like, hey, I want to put you to use. I'm going to train you to be the next royal assassin. And yeah, I would like to say, if you're expecting like a really badass assassin story, you're gonna be disappointed. Fitz is not a very good assassin. I don't think that's a spoiler, to be honest, because he's pretty young in this first book, so I mean, I don't think you expect him to be very good. And like, he is only an apprentice in this one. But he's just so lovable, and you feel so bad for everything he goes through in this series. I mean, he goes through a lot. He goes through a lot in just this one small book, so you can't imagine what he goes through in this big book. A lot. It absolutely destroyed me. This book gave me an existential crisis. That's how you know a book is good, when it gives you an existential crisis. Because I finished it and I was like, nothing that I ever do will be as good as this book is. And it just had me thinking about life. And you know what else gave me an existential crisis? Basically every book on this list. That's how you know they're good. So yeah, I love this series a lot. I can't even explain why. But yeah, I just think I think Robin Hobb's character work is absolutely phenomenal. I think her writing is absolutely beautiful. It took me a while to get used to her writing style. This is kind of my fault. This is one of the first like really big epic fantasy books that I decided to read. Could have eased myself into it a little more, but I ended up falling in love with it. The way she has plotted these out and left hints along the way is absolute genius, and I can't wait to reread them one day, except for the fact I still have 3 more series in the Realm of the Elderlings to get through, so it might be like another 2 years before I reread these. I kind of want to reread them right now though, but I'm about to start the Tawny Man trilogy, which we like revisit Buckkeep, so I probably shouldn't do that. So only 2 more to go. A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. So this series means a lot to me, but this series, it kind of just feels like a hug to me, because again, kind of like with Radio Silence, it was a book I read at the right time in my life. It was the first adult fantasy I ever read. I was purely YA fantasy before these, and I had heard so many great things about these, and then it was kind of like a good starting point in adult fantasy, and so I went for it and I fell in love with these. And I read this like come right up to my exams, and it was like the perfect escapism, and I loved it a lot. As I said, it feels like just a big hug. When I first read them, I remember distinctly the first book was the best, followed by the second, followed by the third, and then I reread them and I was wrong. A Gathering of Shadows is the best book in my opinion. I love this book, and the tension, I distinctly remember liking A Conjuring of Light the least and being like, is this a 4 or a 5? I gave it a 5 in the end because I was like, no, I did really love it, but it was just the weakest. And then I reread this and I was like, no, this is very good. This is like solid 5 out of 5 stars. So yeah, I don't know what I was going through. I guess my reading taste has probably developed. I think one of the reasons why I love it so much is because I very much relate to Kel. Please ignore the fact that I'm just hugging these. I very much relate to Kel, and I guess I find it cool that someone who has a fairly similar personality to me has very cool magic powers. That's probably why I love these so much. I mean, there's a million reasons why I love this series, but another reason is because of Kel and Rye's relationship. It really reminds me of me and my sisters. So I am obviously Kel and my sister is obviously Rye. And I think that is another reason why I really love this series, because it just really, like, their banter really reminds me of the two of us. And like, it's a very good sibling relationship. And one of my favorite sibling relationships. And oh my god, I think I just broke my chair. Anyway, yeah, I just love the characters. I don't adore Lila. I think she goes through a lot of character growth during this series, because she's very much like, I'm not like other girls in the first book. And I like her. I've always liked her. I think she goes through a lot of growth in the entire series. And then I love the plot. I love the magic system. I really love elemental magic anyway, so the magic system really suits me. And I also really love these kind of worlds that you're like, yeah, it could be real. They're just really fast-paced, and I think V.E. Schwab's writing style, it's not super flowery or complicated, but you can fly through it, and I think it gets the job done. And I really like her writing style because I don't really like fancy writing. So that leaves one more series, and I will admit, while I wasn't ranking these, I mean, the way I said them is probably the correct rank. The book series I am about to talk about is my favorite book series ever, and you are going to judge me for it. And I don't care. And that is The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. Can you tell these have been read a lot? And every time I love them more and more. Like, look at this. Look how bent it is. Look at the spine. Can you see all the cracks? Yes, you can. Like, it doesn't even like stand up properly by itself, because the spine is like bent. Because I used to crack my spines. But the thing is, I didn't crack my spines properly by like going halfway, going like 3/4 of the way, going, this is gonna hurt some of you guys. I read like this. I know. I'm ashamed too. Also, I have the last one signed. I'm not even going to pretend that I'm ashamed that I love this series, because yeah, is it the best series ever written? No. Do I care? No. Did I like first read it when I was like 14? Yes. Do I still love it however many years later? Yes, I do. Has my taste changed so much? Yes. Do I think I would love these if I read them for the first time now? No. But it doesn't matter to me. I read this and I'm like, there's a problem with it, but I don't care. I literally don't care. There is valid criticisms for this, because like the plot, I mean, with every Cassandra Clare book, where's the plot? And same with like the villain. The villain's not that great. He has cool motivations, but he's a bit cartoony. Do I care though? No, I don't care at all, because these characters, I've made these characters a part of my personality, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. I don't think I have to tell you what this series is about. It's a Shadowhunter novel. It's set in Victorian London. Tessa Gray arrives. She has a shape-shifting ability. She gets kidnapped, and then she gets rescued by Shadowhunters, and then she gets kind of involved in their world, and then she gets involved in a love triangle. The best love triangle ever written. I would die for Will. I would die for Jem. I would also die for Tessa. And is Tessa a bit bland? Yes. But is she the perfect self-insert for me? Yes, she is. That's probably why I love this series so much, because okay, she's not the most exciting person. Even though she goes through a lot of development in this series, she's not super exciting. I will admit that. Okay, I will admit that. But I love her. As I said, she's the perfect self-insert. She is brunette. She is the same height as me. She loves reading. And she also loves Will and Jem. She is the perfect self-insert, except for the fact that Will and Jem also love her. This series, I wouldn't love this if I read it today. It is romantic, and doesn't have a very strong plot, and these are characters that we've seen over and over again, and it has a love triangle in it. those are all like no to me. Those are all no words. And yet, I just adore this series with every fiber of my being because it just means a lot. And I mean, Cassandra Clare, she was the one who got me into YA fantasy with The Mortal Instruments. And I read The Mortal Instruments and I love that series as well. I don't consider it a favorite anymore because there is, even when I read it the first time, there's books in it that I don't really love, like the second and the fourth. But they got me into YA fantasy. And I remember I put off reading The Infernal Devices after I finished The Mortal Instruments because I was like, nothing's going to live up to it. And it's set in the Victorian times. That is not something I'm going to enjoy. Even back then, I didn't think I would love this. And I read it and I fell in love with every single character in here. And especially as a teen, I was very character driven. I just wanted characters that I could love. And I loved these characters. And I still love these characters. I only reread them last year in February before Chain of Gold came out. And I still loved them. And I don't think I'm ever going to stop loving them. This series, it just means a lot to me. And that's kind of all I can say about it is I basically, from like, I don't know, maybe 13 to 16-ish, I just basically reread the Shadowhunter Chronicles. I always read during my childhood, and then from like 16 on, I've been a really big reader again. But from like, I would say maybe like 13 to 16, there was only a couple of books I read. Like I read the Hunger Games during that time. I read a couple of other books, but I read maybe like 20 books a year. So I would read like maybe one new series and a couple of new books, and then I would reread the Shadowhunter Chronicles. And I would love them every time. And that is still the case. I know that if I revisit these, I will love them. But the problem with me revisiting these is every time I read them, I have like a really bad existential crisis because it makes me feel old. Because as I said, I've read these throughout my teen years and now I'm like, oh my god, I'm getting old. And I also cry every time. But the thing is, I didn't cry the first time I read them. Like that epilogue, I didn't cry. But now, not even the epilogue gets me. I would be just reading a happy scene in Clockwork Angel and all of a sudden I'll be like, I loved it. So, yeah, you can judge me. I have rambled way too long, so I'm gonna have to cut so much out of this. That is all. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. If you did, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!